Bibliophiles of the Internet. My name is Adriana, and today I'm here to finally bring you my July wrap-up. Diving right in, the first book I read in July was Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. I'm actually not going to talk about this book in my wrap-up today because I did an entire spoiler-free video review and discussion for this novel, so if you want to know about the synopsis and my thoughts on the story, I will link that down below. Plus, there is a bonus discussion about queer representation in YA, so if that interests you in any way, give that a look if you haven't already. The next book I read after that was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. I will say that I think the greatest thing that E. Lockhart accomplished in this novel was that she created a complex and compelling family drama, because a lot of the characters in this story come from an upper class kind of background, and the main character's grandfather is getting older, so they're kind of trying to figure out how to split his estate and what's going to happen to all his money after he dies, and that's a very complex issue, and I think she handled it very well. My biggest issues with this novel boil down to the big twist and the ending. Of course, I'm not trying to spoil it for anyone else, so I'm not going to get into specifics, but all I will say is that the big twist felt like a really cheap trick to me, and I felt very cheated as a reader, which is not a good thing. Plus, I thought it was also cliche and kind of for shock value. I didn't see the necessity of it. I didn't really see how it fit into the rest of the story. And of course, I don't really want to focus all my thoughts on this story on the big twist because there's so much more going on in the novel, but it was a really big part of the story and I didn't like it. I don't really want to say anything else because I don't want to imply that I think this story doesn't have merit. In fact, I think it has a lot of strong elements that I really did admire, and I was drawn into the story, but I had issues with it, so I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I read volumes 3 and 4 of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Maybe you've heard of it. Honestly, there's really nothing I can say about this comic series that hasn't already been said by so many other reviewers. It's very much beloved on BookTube, and I am no exception to that rule. I love it so much. I'm a huge fan, and I'm really glad that I finally got to read these 2 volumes. I will say that I think these 2 volumes, especially the 4th volume, are kind of a departure from the rest of the series. There's more of a domestic tone about them. Not that that's a bad thing, I think it's a really good thing because there's finally more focus on the home and the family element as these characters are finally faced with the question, how are we going to raise this child as fugitives of the law? And that is a worthwhile question. I loved both of these volumes. I had a great time reading them, and I can't wait for volume 5. After that, I read The Martian by Andy Weir. Again, I won't be talking about this novel in my wrap-up today because I did a very thorough video review for this novel, so I will link that down below in case you want to know my thoughts. Also, I kind of cheated and used this book to fulfill my July TBR challenge, which was to read an award-winning novel, because this book won a Goodreads Choice Award, so that totally counts. Then I read a classic, and that was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Essentially, this novel is about a young woman named Bathsheba Everdeen, and her uncle, I believe, passes away and leaves her his farm. So she moves to a small village in the countryside to take over his affairs and run his farm. And along the way, she meets 3 very different, striking men who cause her a lot of problems. First off, if I had to use only one word to describe this novel, it would definitely be pastoral, because the countryside plays a huge role in this story, and I think it's definitely a character within its own right. Plus, there is so much beautiful and lush natural imagery that Thomas Hardy manages to capture within this novel in a compelling and unique way. It totally contributed to the feeling of the story, the tone of the story, the atmosphere of the story, and I think it was played perfectly. I also happen to think that this book is populated by incredible characters. They're all so complex because they have clear desires, they have clear goals and things that they want, but their actions and their decisions don't always line up with those desires, and that makes them contradictory characters, and that makes them interesting and fascinating to read about. In fact, there was very little that I didn't like about this story, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then, of course, I read The Last Ever After by Somen Chainani. This is the third and final installment in the School for Good and Evil trilogy, and oh boy, did it make me feel all of the things. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This trilogy is so freaking important. Not only is it original and fun, full of adventure, and with an amazing writing style and complex characters throughout the entire thing, but most importantly, it pushes boundaries again and again in every single book, in every single installment. It brings something new, and I think it's so profoundly complex, and that blows my mind, especially when you step back and realize this is a middle grade series, but it's doing so much incredible work. Each installment in this trilogy focuses on blurring the lines between a specific conflict. The first one is good and evil, the second one is boys and girls, and this one is more focused on new and old. But the good thing is that none of those themes are forgotten as the trilogy progresses. This is very much a series that builds upon itself, and this final book deals with all three of those issues: good and evil, gender roles, and new and old, and how those are different or how they're not different at all. To put it simply, this is one of the most satisfying trilogies that I've ever read, and this was an incredible conclusion, just an incredible conclusion to that trilogy, and I was so happy with it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. And the last thing I read in July was Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I'm actually going to do a full spoiler-free video review for this book, and I will link that down below the second it becomes available, but I don't want to say too much about this book in my wrap-up today. What I will say is that this book should be on all of your radars. It is, in a word, a revelation. It is a breathtaking, female-driven fantasy. It's a standalone. It's very much inspired by Russian folklore and fairy tales, and so it has this nostalgic, ancient, magical feeling about it. The writing style is incredible. I can't say enough good things about this book, and you should all read it. Seriously. So if you want to hear more detailed thoughts on this story and more gushing on my part, then stay tuned to my review. I think it's going to be a good one, but needless to say, I gave this book a huge 5 out of 5 stars. So those were all the books I read in July. In the comments down below, please let me know if you have also read any of the books I mentioned today, or if you would like to do so in the future. But more importantly, I would love to know what was your favorite thing that you read in July. But that is everything I had for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.